everyone. It's the very first podcast for the NGO Learning Center. My name's Val and I'm part of the NGO training team. And for today, we decided on a topic that was requested by the NGO community and is especially relevant for our work with clients from migrant and refugee backgrounds. And that is the topic of culturally reflective casework practice. We've invited Janet Irvine to be our guest speaker for today, and she's part of the learning and development team here at Community Services. She's worked extensively across a number of programs, both in government and the NGO sector. She's been a psychologist, caseworker, trainer, just to name a few. Recently, she's worked with the Multicultural Services Unit here at Community Services to develop and run train-the-trainer sessions for NGOs on this topic. I took some time at the start to ask her why this subject was so important to her. I'd just like to welcome you and thank you for taking part in this.
No problem at all.
What's gotten you interested in this subject?
I guess, probably the turning point for me was I went and lived overseas for a bit over a year in Mexico. And it was at that point in time that I guess I became aware that I had culture myself. From my growing up, I'd always been part of the majority group in Australia, and I'd never really contemplated that I had a cultural beliefs and values myself. And so in being put into a foreign concept where I had to learn a new language and people didn't think the way I thought, and I got a completely different perspective, and I started to reflect, I guess, on what was going on in Australia. And so when I came back to Australia, I then went into working with newly arrived refugees in torture and trauma services. So I worked for 4 years in Darwin in the torture and trauma survivors service up there, and then when I came back to Sydney, I worked for another 4.5 years with the organisation here in New South Wales that some people may know as STARTS, which is a counselling and support service for newly arrived refugees and longer-term refugees who've survived torture and trauma experiences. Through that work, I guess, you get interested in how other people view the world and how they view family and how they view parenting. And I guess every day my experience was challenged when it came to meeting those people, and I learned a lot from those people about how to do things differently and how to communicate differently, and was put into situations where I did feel comfortable, but in being comfortable with being uncomfortable, I guess, I learned some things about how to, I guess, do casework in the cross-cultural context, which I think is the context that we live in. I guess that's how I came to be interested in it.
This topic in particular has been requested because many practitioners who we work with have expressed interest in understanding and developing in this area. And the stats in New South Wales are quite an indication as to what you were saying, that it's part of our role. Just to highlight some stats, the 2011 census has indicated that 48% of the state population has at least one parent born overseas, 34% were born or had at least one parent born in a non-English speaking country, and 22% speak a language other than English at home. So it's completely relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's good indication, that half of our clients now are being influenced by cultures from other countries, whether that's New Zealand or England or Mexico or United States, wherever those people are coming from. It's just so many different influences. And if you're working with families, then that stat of 50% of families have at least one parent born overseas is very relevant to us, because culture has a significant impact on our parenting beliefs and practices.
So it seems appropriate that we talk about this thing called culture first. And in your training, you use this great analogy of an iceberg. Could you share that with us now?
Sure. If you know about an iceberg is generally, there's about an eighth of it above the water and 7/8 beneath it. So there's an eighth that is visible and the rest of it is invisible. Now, when we're talking about culture, if you ask people, what do you know about culture in terms of what's visible, people will name things like food, dance, appearance. They're the things that we can see that are clearly observable about culture. And then there's a whole lot of stuff that is underneath the surface of the water that we often can't see. And that might be why people dress the way they are, the beliefs around why they dress the way they do. It might be connected to a belief around modesty, that they wear certain things. You might see parenting practices, the way that people relate to their children. And I guess in terms of the iceberg, I would see that we all have an iceberg, that it's not just about people of the other cultures that have an iceberg, but we all have an iceberg. So as an Australian person myself, I could ask a room, what is Australian culture? What do we know about it? And there'll be a whole range of things that people will talk about in terms of what's above the surface. So people would say, barbecues, beach, etc. But if you go below the surface, then it's stuff that other people don't know about. Each and every one of us, we're all quite diverse around why we do certain things, and that's a very personal level, I think.
And quite complex too as well. Yeah.